November is just around the corner, and that means the 16th Annual National Podcast Post Month is fast approaching. Hi, I'm Jennifer Navarrete, founder of NaPod Pomo, and I'm inviting you to join the 30-day Global Podcasting Challenge. Whether you're a newbie looking to start your first podcast or a seasoned pro seeking inspiration, NaPod Pomo is the perfect place to experiment and try new things. Visit napodpomo.org to learn more. See where podcasting can take you this November during National Podcast Post Month.
And I have several guys who say, I know you wrote this book for women, but... And I think the reason I did that is it helps me to have that avatar, to picture that woman or that person that I'm writing to. I'm writing to one person and I want this to help her. But the truth is, the book is about the fact that all throughout life, we are faced with major life transitions. And I define a major life transition is that when something that happens that for you is so significant that you're not the same for having gone through it. And then you enter into this new chapter and you have to figure out, okay, I'm not exactly the same as I was. So how do I function in this new chapter of life? And that just happens many times throughout our lives. So I decided, because I was hit with several major life transitions all at the same time, and I realized I did not have the margin to grieve them all. And so I began on this journey to figure out how to grieve in a resilient way, because I had this terrible fear of being this bitter old woman whose life stopped the day her husband died, or the day she got divorced, or the day her child died, or whatever the trauma is that you've been through. I've seen that happen to many people where they don't know how to go on living life. And I did not want that to be me. And so I began this journey. And when I got ready to write the book, I had to go back and reflect and go, okay, what did I do to heal? How did I? And then I put that in the book.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter. I have yet another author on the show with me to talk about all things writing and the journey that this author's been on. I'm always excited to have another author on that I get to meet and learn from. And I know that for the listening audience, it's great. We have new authors listening in and readers that want to connect with the next great book. So Becky Burroughs is on today. We're going to be talking about all of the things that she's been working on and her author journey. Becky, welcome to Living the Next Chapter. Glad to have you here.
Thank you. It is my pleasure to be here. I'm especially intrigued by your title, since Next Chapter Living is what I'm all about, so that it seems meant to be.
I went to your website and there it was, Next Chapter Living, and I'm living the next chapter. It's like we were meant to connect somehow.
Yes.
So great to see that. Amazing. Tell me about your website. It's beautiful, by the way. Kind of walk us through a little bit about your website and kind of the purpose behind who are you targeting and who would you like to work with and connect with through your website?
Okay. So a little bit of a background about me. Mm-hmm. I'm a full-time minister, and about actually the very month that COVID hit the United States was the month I just happened to decide to begin coaching. I had been through coaching training. I got my certification. And so I was ready to hang out my shingle, and lo and behold, it was going to be 100% online because the United States had completely shut down at that point. And so I started really focusing on women, and in particular areas where I had a lot of experience. So in my background, I've spent my entire adult life in the nonprofit arena, as well as in small business as a self-employed person. And so I thought, and ministry. And so that's where I've got the bulk of my experience. And so that's just who I decided I wanted to coach, was women who serve in churches, either as a vocation or as a volunteer, as well as women who lead nonprofits, because those leadership skills are a little bit different than in the corporate world. It's a little different to navigate. And so, that's how I got started. And so on my website, it really reflects that. I do a lot of mindset work because I have found that with women, especially Christian women, they tend to shrink to fit the role they've been assigned rather than fully live into who they are. And so as I began to explore that, I began to develop strategies for working with women to just help them identify their giftedness and fully live into their leadership skills, and even train them in some leadership skills. That's one of the things that has come out over and over again as I coach women in the ministry world is they can have 1, 2, 3 degrees in ministry, but nobody's teaching them how to lead. And so I do leadership boot camps throughout the year, working with women on just some what I consider to be very foundational leadership skills, such as credibility, what it takes to be a credible presence. And I define credibility as when others trust your leadership, confidence, when you trust your own leadership, conflict management, which is ever present if you're dealing with people, and confidence, what it takes to be a confident leader. I actually just finished a leadership boot camp yesterday. And so that's kind of what I've been working on until I decided to write a book.
Here we are. And that's what I'm so glad that we get to connect about that. Tell us more about the book.
So during COVID, when, I was sheltered in place, I began to join private Facebook groups and develop online friendships, and also began to follow other coaches. I believe that every good coach has a coach. And so I chose a coach who specializes in visibility and storytelling. I had been through some really traumatic events a few years prior that I was still recovering from. And I knew I had a story to tell, but I didn't know how. And so I began working with her. And one of the things that she decided to do, that she invited me to be a part of, was to write a collaborative book. And so she grouped 14 women together, and each of us wrote a chapter where we told kind of a micro story that pulls at the thread of the big story, but doesn't really tell it because all you got's a chapter. And so I wrote my chapter on my journey with grief. And that book instantly became an Amazon #1 bestseller. It came out in 2022. And I enjoyed the experience much more than I ever anticipated. So I had this coach who was a visibility coach and a book writing coach working with us, because none of us had ever written a book before. And they taught us all about the writing process, the self-publishing process, and launching and promoting a book. So that when that book came out in April of 2022, I had a fire in me that was not going to be quenched until I wrote my own book. And so that very next month, I hired the book writing coach named Lynette Pottle to work with me for a year, teaching me how to write. I've always enjoyed writing, but I've never had the discipline of writing. I'll go through phases where, I'm going to have a blog, and I'll do a blog for, a year, and then I stop, or I'll keep a journal off and on, and then I stop. And so again, I didn't have the discipline. And I knew that if I didn't have some accountability to someone, it wasn't going to happen, because like most people, I have a very busy life. Full-time job in ministry, side gig as a coach. I got 17 grandkids. I've got a very busy life.
Wow.
So that was one of the most important things she did for me, was help me develop a schedule, because I wanted my book to publish a year later. Mm-hmm. So, and we sat down and talked about not only what the book would be about, but how long do you want it to be? How many chapters, how many pages, and to kind of give me some kind of rough goal. And so I began on this schedule of writing. And then after that, she coached me on, helped me develop my own publishing imprint and how to self-publish, how to launch my own book, and the promotion part of it, which is why I'm here today. Yeah. I committed to a year to promote my book, a minimum of a year, by being on podcasts and speaking engagements and writing in blogs and doing other things. And so that's kind of where I am now, deep in that.
So tell me about the promotion around the book. What's working for you so far? What have you tried? What have you not tried yet around supporting the book with promotion?
So really promoting the book begins during the launching. The launching is so important. Yeah. And actually doing a pre-launch and even a pre-launch, building an excitement around the book, building momentum, making people eager to see what it's going to be. So I began, I think 3 months prior, with a tease where I'd show just a part of the title and just kept pulling back the cover each time. And by the time I, gave the title, people were so excited about it. And I did the same thing where every week I would give little teasers. Sometimes it was an audiogram of me reading a portion of the book. Sometimes I had a blog where I talked about the book writing process because I was learning as I went what worked for me and just sharing tidbits about it. And I did that solid for 3 months so that on the launch day, which I had been promoting for weeks prior, there's such an outpouring of people scrambling to buy the book on launch day that it became a bestseller that day on Amazon.
Yeah.
And so I immediately launched into the promotion of the book. So as I said, guesting on, having a book signing party was really important. And it was a huge success and invited, I think I had about maybe 50 people there, people who had supported me through the process and who had bought the book and that kind of thing. And the interesting thing for me is my coach suggested, have a Q&A as part of it. And I'm thinking, I'm an introvert, and I'm thinking, who am I to assume people want to ask me questions? And so sure enough, there was about an hour's worth of questions. Because these were my people in my world, there were mostly questions about, why did you want to write a book? How did you do it? It's mostly how-to questions. A couple of weeks later, one of the gentlemen at the book signing said, I want to host you on what I'm calling Dinner with the Author. And he literally purchased a book for everybody he was going to invite. He purchased 20 books and he said to them, I'm going to give you this book. And all I ask is that you read it and then come to dinner and be prepared to ask the author some questions. I did not know what to expect, this being my first book and certainly my first dinner with the author. And I go in there and I'm meeting all these people I don't know and had this wonderful dinner. And then he puts us in the living room and now you're going to ask the author questions. And I remember the first woman said, I don't have a question so much as a comment. And she began to tell me parts of the book that resonated with what's going on in her life. And she's crying and others are crying. And then another lady goes, me too. I want to make a comment. And then one by one, each person was talking about what this book meant to them and how they resonated with it. And this went on for 2 hours. And I'm not talking 2 hours of like long periods of silence or people looking bored. I've never been a part of anything like it where it was so interactive and people wanting to speak. And that was just a phenomenal experience for me. I'm actually having another book signing in South Texas in a couple of months, and it'll probably be completely different. I really enjoy that, connecting with people who have read the book. Writing is a little bit kind of a lonely business. You're alone while you're writing. You're kind of on your own publishing, except for the experts that you ask to help you, like an editor and such. And then you see the numbers that they're being sold, but you don't, unless they write a review, you don't always hear how the book resonated with them. And so, it was just so important for me to actually get the feedback and see that somebody connected on a particular thing. But then I've also been doing speaking engagements where I'm talking about the book, I'm selling the book at the back of the room and that kind of thing. And then I'm guesting on blogs and just looking for more opportunities to keep writing.
That's great. And then being on podcasts, has that been a good part of your strategy for promoting the book as well?
It has been a very important part of my strategy. And I have already been on a half a dozen and I've got several more scheduled. And each one, like yours, is very unique in its own way. And so even though I'm talking about similar things each time, it's still very different because the host is very different and the questions are different. Yeah. And so I really enjoy it. I'm actually hoping to start my own podcast in a few months.
Well, now I'm super curious about that as well, because I'm always looking for the next podcast to listen to. Yes. So I have my hand raised. I'm ready to sign up and listen to that as well. So would love to get feedback on that and some timelines in the future that we can let people know when that's ready. That would be interesting as well.
I actually yesterday made the commitment that I'm going to launch it January 3rd. Nice. And the title I'm playing with right now is Leadership Becomes Her. Oh. I just really believe that so many women are so gifted to lead. And if they just believed that and knew how, this world would be a different place.
Amazing. So everyone pay attention, listen up, make sure you watch out for that release, because another new podcast is always great. And I'm looking forward to being part of your community for that and listening in. I know I'm a guy listening in, but I'm sure there's many things I can learn, and I'm excited about that.
And I have several guys who say, I know you wrote this book for women, but, and I think the reason I did that is it helps me to have that avatar, to picture that woman or that person that I'm writing to. I'm writing to one person and I want this to help her. But the truth is, the book is about the fact that all throughout life, we are faced with major life transitions. And I define a major life transition is that when something that happens that for you is so significant that you're not the same for having gone through it. And then you enter into this new chapter and you have to figure out, okay, I'm not exactly the same as I was. So how do I function in this new chapter of life? And that just happens many times throughout our lives. So I decided, because I was hit with several major life transitions all at the same time, and I realized I did not have the margin to grieve them all. And so I began on this journey to figure out how to grieve in a resilient way. Because I had this terrible fear of being this bitter old woman whose life stopped the day her husband died, or the day she got divorced, or the day her child died, or whatever the trauma is that you've been through. I've seen that happen to many people where they don't know how to go on living life. And I did not want that to be me. And so I began this journey. And when I got ready to write the book, I had to go back and reflect and go, okay, what did I do to heal? How did I? And then I put that in the book.
Becky, the one thing I would really like to know a little bit more is about the chapter in the initial first book that you wrote. Can you kind of give us a little bit of insight into that as well? Because I think that's a great origin story for you as an author, and what you learned in the process of writing for that chapter that you carried forward to what you're doing today.
Yeah. So what happened was in a very short span of time, my dad died suddenly. My husband walked out the door, ending our 40-year marriage. My mom died very slowly, and then my job was eliminated. I work at a church, and I was the executive minister. And just for budget reasons, the decision was made to eliminate that role and ask me to take another one. Happens all the time in ministry. It's not that uncommon. It's just the fact that boom, 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 all these things happening at once. I realized I had a full-blown identity crisis. I would look in the mirror and the stranger was looking back at me. And I realized that I didn't know who I was anymore, because I had tied my entire identity in the roles I filled, the titles I wore, and the responsibilities I had. And when those were stripped away, I was left with, well, who am I and what is my purpose anymore? So one of the things I had to first learn how to do was grieve, because for some reason I cannot explain, throughout my life, I thought grief was something reserved for death. If someone died, you grieved it. If anything less than that, you got over it. You dealt with it. And when I realized that I was wrong about that, and that grief, and I learned to respect the purpose of grief and follow the process of grief, it diminished the hold it had on me. I began to see it as something not that had overtaken me, but something I needed to work through. You never get over grief, but you do learn how to work through it. And so that first chapter I wrote in the book's called Elevate Your Voice. And my chapter was about what I did in the very beginning, after all that stuff happened, what I did to kind of get back to health. And so, for example, one of the things I did was I realized I had lost all joy in my life. And I think the secret ingredient to joy is gratitude. So I needed things to be grateful for. And so I started keeping a journal of fun, new, or interesting things I was doing. And I had a goal. I started on my 59th birthday, and I had a goal that I would, by the time I turned 60, I will have listed 60 fun, new, or interesting things. Well, a year came. I didn't have 60. I had 600. Because whatever you are looking for is what you will find. And I was looking for joy. And so no thing was too small to list in my journal. If I read a good book, going in the journal. If I went to a restaurant and tried a new dish, going in the journal. And so it became just, and again, as I said, I've never been a consistent journaler, but that really, I became passionate about that because it was filling me with such joy to realize I can enjoy life again in the smallest of things. And so when I turned 60 and I had accomplished that goal, I thought, well, I can do 7,000 by the time I'm 70. It gives me 10 years to do it. And I'm over halfway there, and I couldn't tell you what number I'm on, and it doesn't matter to me anymore, the number, because I've learned how to find joy every day, how to look for it and how to find it. And that was such an important part of resilient grieving for me. And I talk about that in that chapter.
I love the idea of putting something ahead of yourself that now becomes your focus. And then when you focus on it, like you said, it becomes reality for you. And just finding gratitude and being grateful. That's I think a lost art. I think that many of us could really put into practice right away, no matter where we're at, and learn from that example. It's a great story. I love that.
Thank you. And I tend to value joy more than I value happiness. It's not that I'm opposed to being happy, but being happy is dependent on what's happening, right? Oh, I'm so happy. This happened. And then something changes and I'm not happy anymore. And it's just this roller coaster of emotion. But joy is deep. Joy, you can be joyful even when bad things are happening, because even in the midst of bad things, you can find things to be grateful for, no matter how small. It's one of the things that I teach a lot when I do leadership boot camp. Men may be this way as well, but women somehow equate humility with being self-deprecating. And so they beat themselves up for everything they did wrong and everything they should have done and neglected to do, and don't spend any time celebrating. And so I literally teach a daily habit of celebrating. I do this every night as I'm getting ready for bed. What are my wins for today? And it could just be, I remembered to do that thing, or I did 3 things on my list, or I actually locked, it could be so silly, but I did it. And I'm so proud I did it. And there's something magical about identifying and naming and owning any success in the day to end your day well.
And now that you're an author with now your own book, and you're saying that people were asking you more how-to questions, are you leaning now towards helping people with their author journey now?
Yeah, I do. So I've been doing it unofficially, but that's something, it's kind of like anything else you do. I can tell you what works for me and help you find what works for you. But there's no one size fits all. I tried, a lot of people, you walk into a Starbucks or any of those kind of places, you see all these people working at their computers, right? So I thought, I'm going to be one of those cool authors that goes to a place like that and writes my book. Yeah. So we have a sandwich shop in Texas called Panera. And it's one of those places like a Starbucks that encourages you to hang out all day. So I get my computer and I go to Panera and I get me a bowl of soup and a drink, and I got my nest all made and I'm ready to write. And the guy next to me is on his phone and he's talking so loud, I'm really distracted. So I'm able to tune him out. And then I realized the air conditioning is hitting me in the top of the head and I'm really so cold. And so I tuned that out. And then all of a sudden, Elton John comes on singing, I can't think of the song, but man, I can feel it. And I'm just sitting there doing this. And I'm like, and then the women behind me are laughing. I wasn't there 10 minutes before I packed her up and went back home. And I realized I'm the kind of writer that needs to be right here at my desk where I can look out the window, but if the house is as quiet as I want it to be. And learning that about yourself, or even the discipline of writing, whether you are an early morning writer, a late night, weekend, whatever you do, it's what works for you that matters. And so, yes, I love sharing those tips that I've learned. I actually did it all throughout my writing process. Mistakes I made, things I would do differently next time. I think those are really important as well.
Yeah. And I love when the community can follow along on the journey of you on your path of writing, and you bring them in and you give them, like you said, a little sneak peek. Let them kind of see the journey happening in front of them. And they can say that they were with you from the time the idea to the result.
That's
and
exactly
they were with
right.
you on the path, and they love to be a part of the journey. and then they buy the book. It all makes sense.
Yeah. And because I've seen a couple of different statistics, so don't hold me to the exact numbers, but I read where 83% of people wish they could write a book and only 3% do.
Wow.
And if that's even close to being true, there's something exciting about following along when someone's doing something you always wished you could do. And I was one of those. I knew I always wanted to write a book. And because I spent the first half of my life reading fiction, I thought it would be this wonderful work of fiction. But then in the second half of my life so far, I've been very much into self-help and improvement and that kind of thing. So it makes sense that it turned out to be more in that genre.
Nice. So again, for new authors that are listening in and they're early on the journey, they're sitting in Panera and they're distracted and they're having a hard time writing their book, getting motivated to write. Anything else that kind of comes to mind that would have been helpful for you, even maybe in the first book where you wrote the one chapter? Anything that you would say now?
I will tell you something that was helpful in the solo book. The first chapter that I wrote, I had these two coaches holding me accountable. So I had serious deadlines. So that really wasn't a problem. But when I decided to write my own book, even though I held myself accountable to my coach, it was still up to me. She wasn't going to tell me what to do. It was still up to me. So I was supposed to start my book 1st of May, and I immediately got the flu. So that delayed it a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
In June, I got COVID. And so that delayed it. So what I started doing, I couldn't wrap my head around writing fresh, brand new material for a book because I was getting over this illness and whatnot. So I just created a story bank, a Google Drive document, and I just called it Story Bank. And so every time I remembered a story that I thought was worth telling, I would write it in the story bank so that by the time I was far enough in my outline to really get going on my book, I had this bank of wonderful stories, many of which did not make the cut in this book, but some of them did, and they were already written, but it made me feel productive long before I was actually productive on this book. Writer's block is a real thing. And especially I think for a new writer who doesn't know how to get started, that was invaluable for me. It made me feel like a writer, that I had pages and pages and pages of something, whether or not it went in the book, turned out to be immaterial, but it really helped me get going. And it started helping the juices flow too.
What do you do with the bonus content that didn't make the book? Do you repurpose it some way?
It is still in this folder to be used at other times. Like I said, one of the things I'm doing lately is guest blogging. And so when I get on someone's blog and I decide what I'm going to write on, I can go look at my story bank and see if I already have a story written that goes along with that. If not, I'll have stories already ready for my next book whenever that happens.
Sweet. That's a smart idea. That's a very good idea. That's one of the things I hear from a lot of authors is they do get stuck at times and they don't know how to get past that hurdle, whatever that is in their way.
And I think stories are an important part of writing. I think it's our story. I had one reader tell me, she said, your book is just chock full of good coaching principles, but it was your stories that I really connected with. And that was good for me to hear because it feels very vulnerable when you're putting in stories about your life. And so to hear that made the difference for readers was really helpful.
Nice. I like that. I like that a lot. So the podcast, again, Living the Next Chapter, we're all about the author's journey and making connections with great authors. And what's interesting for our audience is it's a mixture of authors and readers. Mm-hmm. So we have kind of both sides of the book here, interested in what we're talking about. So again, from the reader's perspective for your books, and your most recent one, who would this be if we were able to define in podcasting, we talk about our avatar, our ideal listener, who would be your ideal reader? Who should this book be presented to as maybe a gift idea? Mm-hmm. How can we support you by talking more about your book out in public?
Yes. My avatar is a woman who's lived some life, and she's not necessarily because she's older. Some of us live a lot of life before we get out of our 20s, just by the circumstances of our lives. But she can identify some really crippling major life transitions she's been through. I talk about some of the common ones that most of us can expect to go through, such as And some of these aren't crippling in any way. They're very normal part of growing up, such as graduating high school or leaving home for the first time, whether you go off to college or you get your first job or getting married or having your first baby, buying your first house.
Yeah.
And those things that are perfectly normal parts of life, we look forward to them, but we don't realize your life is not going to be the same anymore. And so we're not always prepared. And that's the thing I talk about in the book. You may not be ready for your children to all leave the nest, but you can be prepared. You may not be ready to outlive your husband, but you can be prepared. And that's half the battle, is looking. And I'm just right now, this moment, I'm talking about those major life transitions we can expect to happen. Then there's the unexpected ones,
Right.
the debilitating illness, or accident, or divorce instead of death, or the loss of a loved one in any way, or losing your job, or retiring and not knowing what to do with yourself, that we all have to learn how to navigate. In the last chapter of the book, I interviewed other women because I did not want my particular circumstance to be what keeps someone going, yeah, I can't relate to this. These things haven't happened to me. So I interviewed, I can't remember how many women who had been through their own major life transitions. So these are women who've been through divorce, being widowed, losing their jobs, losing children in utero, women who've been through the IVF experience, women who have been in abusive marriages, and so on and so on. And I had a series of questions. So when I interviewed each woman via Zoom, I asked everyone the same questions. And it had to do with, first of all, hearing their story. And then what was rock bottom for you? What did you do to heal? What did you learn from the process? What mistakes did you make? And that kind of thing. And then I promised to protect their identity. So I lumped them all together. So I know, for example, women who have been through IVF that I did not know was as traumatic as it is. I probably interviewed 5 or 6 women who'd been through that, and I lumped them all together so you couldn't tell who said what, and here's what they said was rock bottom. Here's what they said they had to do to heal. Here are the mistakes they made, and it was eerily similar. Or the women, I had 2 different women say to me, the day you leave your abusive husband is the scariest day of your life.
Wow.
2 different women that don't even know each other saying the same words. I had women who didn't know each other describing divorce the same way, describing infertility the same way. And I think we can, if we're willing to share our stories, we can learn so much from each other. And so that was a really important chapter to me, to be able to share their stories and what they learned and how they grew and how we can be more helpful to women going through major life transitions.
That's powerful there. And that's some great insight as well to how it was created, that chapter in particular, because I think when we come to that chapter and read it now, we have a new lens as a reader. Now we can and maybe we can take something more out of it now that we know how you built that chapter in particular. That's interesting how you did that.
Thank you. The name of that chapter is Courageous Women, Compelling Stories. It was an honor to sit at their feet and hear these stories and how they've overcome what they've been through.
What doors have opened for you with the book? What excites you about sharing more about the message of the book with your community?
I think the door that has opened the most, besides being on podcasts, which I really enjoy, was realizing, number one, that I needed my own podcast. And again, it's kind of like writing a book. I've always thought about it, but I hadn't done it. I need to do that. But the speaking engagements, I love public speaking, and I love in particular doing like workshops and retreats. I did a retreat for a church here in Texas a couple of weekends ago and I called it Let's Get Real. And it was all about the power of story. And I taught the women a very simple method of telling your story, the same one that Pixar uses. Pixar makes all these precious cartoons, and they call it the story arc. And so I taught the women the story arc, how to tell their story that way, leaving out all the salacious details. But it's basically, here's who I was before. Here's this thing that happened to me. Here's who I am now. And here's what I've learned. And then because we were in a church, and these are women who are Christians, I taught them how to take their story and turn it into a God story, where a story that glorifies God and blesses others, so that that thing you went through now has a purpose. Yeah. And so I was unprepared for how much I would enjoy that. Creating that retreat and doing that with the women and getting to know all these women and getting feedback in real time from them was incredible. So I'm looking to do more of that. I'm actually promoting this retreat as a retreat or a workshop. It doesn't have to be as intensive as it was there, so that I get to do it more. I want to get the word out about, your story has value.
So if someone is planning a retreat for maybe a church women's group, for example, yes, and they're looking for a speaker to come in and do that for them somewhere else, would you be interested? Oh, good.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing, because that would be a transformational weekend to be able to be in community with people that you don't know. And you and I are self-admitted introverts. So it's a big task to go stand in front of a group of people you don't know. Yes. And lead a group like that. But when you have a message that connects the way yours does, yes, and the people that you can help, I think we sometimes need to set our introvert self aside a little bit so that the yes, message can come out.
Well, and this church, not only paid me to do this retreat, they bought a copy of my book for every woman that came.
Nice.
Oh, it was wonderful. And there were about 60 women there. And I just asked them, would anybody be willing to give a testimonial as to what this weekend's been like for you? Because it was very transformational. And I think I got 10 video testimonies and about 25 written testimonies. It was really over the top, incredible weekend for me, and appeared to be for them as well, to learn that what I've gone through isn't for nothing. I can do something with this.
Amazing. Okay. So Becky, I could have you on forever, which is great. One of my other podcasts is called the How to Podcast series. And when I
have listened to it. I've listened to some episodes.
See? Yes. But I invite podcasters on as co-hosts to talk about their show and talk about their journey. So I'm going to leave the door open. I would love to have you come back for that podcast. Talk about building your new show, promote your show. I'd love to have you on as a guest co-host for that. I would
love that.
Okay, so please keep me in mind. Okay. Thank you for listening, by the way. That was nice of you. But as far as connecting with you, and again, there's a group looking for an amazing speaker to come and be the host for an event that they're planning, or we want more information about the book. There's so much, your coaching. There's so much to talk about. Where do we go? How do we find you and connect? And where are you most active on social media?
Yeah, as long as you can spell my last name correctly, you're gold, because everything's called that. So it's Becky Burroughs. Becky is Becky. Burroughs is Burroughs. So my website is beckyburroughs.com. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn as Becky Burroughs Coaching. And my email address is hello@beckyburroughs. At beckyburroughs.com. Mm-hmm.
There you go.
So if you can spell my last name, you can find me.
And we will put it in the show notes so that everyone can get there.
Deal.
Becky, it's so nice to have you on the podcast.
It's been my pleasure.
A great conversation, and you're a super great guest as well. I'm sure you're going to be a great host on your podcast. So I'm looking forward to that. Do you know if you're going to be, is it all going to be solo hosted, interview based? What are you thinking?
Both. It will be a percentage, probably. I'm thinking 3 solo to 1 interview.
Good.
So I'll come find you. I'll have you on my show.
Oh, come on. That would be amazing. I would love to come on there and share with you on that. That's great.
Right.
So let's keep the door open and keep the conversation going. Becky, thank you so much for being part of the podcast. Thank you for your time today. And I'm looking forward to all the great things coming for you down the road as well.
Thank you for having me, David. You're a great host.
Thanks for being part of the podcast again. Appreciate you investing time in the show and you for listening this far. Thank you. One thing to keep in mind is we are looking for help and some support for the podcast. If you are able to help support our show, our little podcast show here, we can go over to livingthenextchapter.com and all the instructions will be there to help support the show. It takes about $30 to $40 a month to do this, just for the hosting and all of that other stuff that we pay for. But if the show is giving you any value and you're enjoying what's happening here, would love any kind of support that you can offer. That would be great. And you being here and sharing the show helps us grow. Helps us get great new authors on the show, connect with other listeners, and build community. So whatever you can do to share this show today, I really appreciate it. Thank you for being here for Living the Next Chapter, and I can't wait to share the next one with you. Talk soon. Have a great day.